Are you recording?
Yes.
Okay. So it's 7:03. We're going to open up the meeting for Tuesday, April 14th, 2020. Welcome to the Town of Williston Development Review Board, being brought to you live via Zoom, something new and different. Based on the original agenda, there were 3 items on the agenda. DP 09-01.18, the Snyder FC Commercial Properties LLC and Riley Properties LLC has been continued to April 28th, 2020. Also, DP 20-03.1, Americo Real Estate Company and U-Haul International has been continued to June 23, 2020, leaving 1 item on the agenda for tonight, which is DP 20-18, Ethan Allen Holdings LLC, care of Christopher Senesac. We'll get to that in a minute. There are a couple of pieces of housekeeping we need to do before we get started. First is I'm going to read into the record a statement from the Vermont League of Cities and Towns dealing with remote public meetings. To start with, I, Scott Riley, as chair of the Williston Development Review Board, find that due to the state of emergency declared by Governor Scott as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic and pursuant to Addendum 6 to the Executive Order 01-20 and Act 92, this public body is authorized to meet electronically. In accordance with Act 92, there is no physical location to observe and listen contemporaneously to this meeting. However, in accordance with the temporary amendments to the open meeting law, I confirm that we are A, providing public access to the meeting by video conference with additional access offered through telephone. We are using Zoom for this remote meeting. All members of the Development Review Board have the ability to communicate contemporaneously during the meeting through Zoom, and the public has access contemporaneously to listen and, if desired, participate in the meeting. Planning staff will provide instructions for public participation using Zoom before the hearings are opened. B, providing public notice of instructions for accessing the meeting. We previously gave notice to the public of the necessary information for accessing this meeting, including how to access the meeting on Zoom with a computer, smartphone, or regular telephone in our posted meeting agenda. Instructions have also been provided on the town website at www.town.williston.vt.us. Click on Departments and Services, then Agendas and Minutes, and navigate to the desired meeting date. C, providing a mechanism for the public to alert the public body during the meeting if there are problems with access. If anybody has a problem, please use the chat feature within Zoom, which is Alt plus H at the same time, Alt H, or email or call Emily Heyman at eheyman, that's EHEYMANN at willistonvt.org, or the phone number is 802-878-6704, extension 3. D, continuing the meeting if necessary. In the event the public is unable to access the meeting, it will be continued to a time and a place certain. Please note that all votes taken during this meeting that are not unanimous will be done by roll call vote in accordance with the law. Let's start the meeting by taking a roll call attendance of all DRB members participating in this meeting.
Paul Christensen, present.
Pete Kelly, present.
Dave Turner, present.
Joe?
Oh, Joe, we can't hear you, but you are unmuted.
Is that better?
Yes.
Okay. For some reason, I have to hit mute and then unmute again. Jill Spinelli, present.
Okay, thanks everybody. A couple more things. So let's see here. There are members in the audience who I believe that have questions. We are and would like to have a list of audience participants who would like to speak during the hearing. Emily, do we have a list made, or should we do that right now?
Yes, I do have a document. Before we get to that document, I just want to go over a couple of Zoom features for everybody. In front of you, you should see this document. If you want to speak, press the raise hand button or *9 if you're calling in on a telephone. I'll add your name to this list momentarily to keep track of who has and hasn't spoken. When it's your turn to speak, you'll be promoted from an attendee to a panelist. Your screen will say rejoining, and then your Zoom window will automatically reopen again. Sharing your video is optional, but you must unmute yourself to speak. You'll press the microphone symbol on your toolbar. So when I prompt you to speak, you'll get a window that pops up like this. You'll want to click unmute now. Attendees joining on your computer, this is what your toolbar looks like right now. You will not see the Q&A feature. We're not using that. Here's the raise hand button and the chat feature. Use chat if you have questions about Zoom troubleshooting. It is going to become part of the public record, but we're going to take all our testimony verbally tonight. Use that if you're having issues with Zoom. If you're having trouble hearing me, click on this arrow next to audio settings, and that will prompt the Zoom audio features. When you get bumped up to panelist, you'll see the mute button and as well as the start video option. Again, video is optional for attendees. Again, chat is for troubleshooting, becomes public record. Q&A and share screen, those features are not enabled for attendees for safety reasons. And the raise hand feature on the toolbar or *9 on the telephone. There's a couple things that attendees can also do to optimize their screen view. At the top right, under your minimize and close out buttons, you can toggle between gallery view and speaker view. This button with the 4 corners will make it full screen as well. Right now I'm sharing my screen, so you'll see the green toolbar. Next to that, you can click view options and do side by side. So you can look at the screen share on one side and all the board members on the other side. And there's a bar in the middle. You can adjust your video as well. There's a symbol here. You can toggle between the documents and the videos as well to your preference. Again, if you're joining by telephone or if you're watching this live on channel 17, you can participate on the telephone by pressing *6 to mute or unmute yourself and *9 to raise your hand. The documents that we will be sharing tonight are all posted on our website, Town of Williston, Public Records and Documents, Agendas and Minutes, Development Review Board. Scroll down and you'll see all of the documents. Sometimes with the Zoom screen share, they can be a little bit blurry. Pulling them up in your web browser will ensure you have a high quality view. So without further ado, I'm going to go back to the sign-in PDF. And I'm opening up the attendees list. If you would like to speak, please press the raise hand button now. Alrighty.
Hey, Emily, can I just check? This is for anyone that wants to speak during the hearing for 20 20-18, correct?
Correct. Yes. Thank you for clarifying. This is for speaking for 20-18. We haven't opened the hearing yet. Just doing a little housekeeping to keep everything organized. If you choose to speak during the hearing, again, press the raise hand button and I can add your name to this list at any time. All right. All right, Scott, back to you.
Okay. Thanks, Emily. A couple more pieces of things that we'd like to go over. Emily, do you have the ability to highlight the document that you produced explaining the role of the Development Review Board? That's something you can pull up and put on the screen?
Yes.
Great, thank you very much. So, members of the audience, attendees, Emily has put the first page of a multi-page document on the screen for you to look at. You can find this document on the town website. This document is a discussion and description of the role of the Development Review Board. It is very handy in understanding the process that we are undergoing tonight. A lot of the letters that came in regarding this project, the questions that were posed in the letters are answered in this document. It does explain the role of this board, the areas that this board covers, and that's within our purview, and in the areas that is not within our purview. I suggest everybody who is interested in this hearing read this document. You can do so while we're having the hearing, but please take a look at it. So that's available on our website. Emily did a great job putting it together, and it's something that we will be using continuously in the future. Also, this hearing, we are taking testimony on this hearing tonight, DP 20-18, Ethan Allen Holdings. This hearing is going to be continued until April 28th. So I'll mention that again when the hearing is open. Again, this is just some of the housekeeping issues that we're going through. Let's see, members of the audience and attendees. I saw 6 names pop up on the list, 5 or 6 names pop up on the list. I believe most of you have submitted letters. Please do not read your letter into the record. We do have it. It is part of the record. We are happy to take your comments. If somebody previous to you who has spoken has covered what you want to talk about, please keep your comments brief. You don't need to go through the same issues. You can just mention that either you agree with that or and if you have other items that you want to bring up, please do so.
Scott, one moment. Sorry to pause you.
Nope.
There are a couple chat comments requesting a continuance of the hearing tonight, and a couple of the comment letters that were submitted were asking that this hearing be continued before testimony is taken.
Right. So we're not doing that. We are taking testimony tonight. However, the hearing will be continued to April 28th.
Okay.
Okay. Okay. And that's so just as a reminder, because the hearing will be continued, no vote is being taken on this hearing tonight. With that said, we are going to open DP 20-18 Ethan Allen Holdings LLC, care of Christopher Senesac at 717. We have the applicants. We have the applicants online.
Yep. I'm going to promote them up to panelist. I see Chris and Paul.
Are they up?
We're here.
Yes, I'm here.
Okay, great. Gentlemen, good evening. Would you state your names and your addresses for the record, please?
My name is Paul O'Leary, O'Leary Burke Civil Associates, 13 Corporate Drive, Essex Junction, Vermont.
Christopher Senesac, 405 Michael Lane, Williston, Vermont.
Welcome, gentlemen. So Emily is running the meeting, and she's managing the video feed and Zoom. Matt Boulanger is going to run through the staff notes, and turn it over to you, Matt.
Thank you,
Wait,
Scott.
hold on, Matt, before we get started, I'm wondering,
If somebody,
should we let the folks who have their hands raised speak before we get going too far?
Sure.
Okay, I see Jeff and Scott have their hands raised. I'm gonna press allow to talk. Do you guys have anything you'd like to add?
Thanks, Emily, and thanks, Scott, and everyone on the board. Scott, I understand. Can you hear me, first of all?
Yes,
Yes.
I can.
Please state your name.
Scott Whittier, over at Coyote Lane. I understand you are going to have a continuance, Scott. I'm not sure how far we should get along with this, given that we're going to have the continuance, because if you remember the December meeting, we had about 25 representatives, and we only have about 5 today, with letters that Emily mentioned about asking for a continuance. So I really would think it's to benefit, so there's no repetition of statements, that this gets totally postponed until continue to a later date. I know in the very first meeting you did the same thing because you didn't feel there was enough of a quorum and you don't want to repeat the testimony. So I really think before we go any further that given there's at least 4 people applying for a continuance, that that's a strong consideration.
Okay, and the other comment?
Just some of the other comments. I noticed that the Williston Conservation Commission's application on April 1 shows 132 units, but I see in the actual statement the posting that was done by the town, that's 141 units now. So that is not doesn't fit with the original application. I'm also concerned about the waterways, which I think will all be addressed, but I just want to bring those 2 points up, and I may have more later. Thank you.
Yeah, that's fine. And then there's another gentleman who I believe had his hand up.
Jeff and Tim.
yeah, I want to, this is Tim Sheehan. I'm at 114 Raven Circle here in Williston. I would also respectfully ask for a continuance for the same reasons that Chris just mentioned, but also I have a firm, an engineering firm that's looking at some of this proposal, and they are closed because they're deemed non-essential. And so the information that I'm trying to get back from them, I have not gotten, and I will not be able to get until obviously this pandemic situation is, put behind us somewhat. So I feel like in order to fully vet this proposal in front of us, we're being hindered because of the situation. And if we can't have the information that we're trying to get to fully vet the project, I feel like we need to continue it just so that everyone is all on the same page.
Okay, thank you. Matt and Emily, can you mute the audience? Can we have a discussion?
I don't know if there's a way to do that within the webinar, like for the DRB to go and close deliberations right now.
Yeah. Okay. So Scott and Tim, are they still on?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. So this is pre-application. I understand that your engineering firm is closed. A lot of people are closed. I've been advised that we are going to run the hearing, or the necessity of running the hearing. This is pre-application. You are not losing any time. You're not by not having an engineering firm. You would at a hearing at this juncture of the hearing process, you would not be expected to have an engineering firm. Certainly you could, if you so desired. It probably would not, it probably, I got to be careful what I say there, I guess. It's your right to have it if you wish. I'm not sure that it would make a lot of difference, given that this is really a discussion about the project. No decisions are being made about this project until it gets to the discretionary permit application. That is when all of the hard data about the project, both from the applicant as well as anything that you wish to provide, would be required. Right now, this is simply a time to listen to the project. As stated, it is already going to be continued. I think so. That's where we're at.
Can I get clarification from Tim? I understood his comment to be that he was seeking information from the applicant's engineer. Is that correct?
No, that's not correct. I have a.
You have your own engineer.
Correct, that I've been in contact with just to get some general information, and they were working on that. But since this pandemic has closed almost all business in the state, then obviously their business had to close to follow those rules from the state, and now that information I'm without, and I do feel that is relevant information, whether this meeting is continued or not, for the review board to have in order to make their decision, because it is a process, and I understand that, but to not have all the pertinent information from our residents here, I think that would be doing a disservice.
Tim, this is Pete Kelly. What specific engineering were you asking your consultant to do?
I was looking at a couple of different things as far as some of the watershed information and some of the right-of-way information that is being looked into.
Matt, I'm wondering, should we go over the pre-app a little bit more and the memo about
Emily, I'm going to jump in and say this: we are holding the hearing. We are taking testimony. We are going to limit it. We are going to run the testimony until approximately 9 o'clock. It is going to be continued to the 28th. Scott Whittier and Tim Sheehan, we certainly will take their testimony. The information that they're looking for we'll have ample time with their engineers once this is fleshed out, assuming that it does pass pre-app. So with that, let's go to Matt Belanger and let Matt walk through the staff notes.
All right. So to the board, I'm going to attempt to be briefer than I usually am in going through these staff notes. They're fairly extensive, but in the idea of leaving lots of room for folks who are attending tonight to ask the board questions and for the board to ask questions, I'm going to try to do this fairly efficiently. This is a
Matt, you just
41 unit residential subdivision.
Matt, this is Scott. Could you start over again? You blanked out on me. I'm not sure if you did for anybody else.
Yeah.
I'm going to call in for audio. I'm getting a notice that my connection's unstable. If you just give me one moment.
While Matt is
All
coming
right.
in, while
Hi,
Matt
Matt.
while Matt is coming in, I have seen, I am seeing some of the chat going on. And I'm going to, this is the only time I'm going to do this while we are going through the staff notes. But I do want to tell the audience and attendees that I am not opposed. So staff recommended April 28th as the continuance date. We'll discuss that in our deliberations. We may push that out to a later date in order to have a in-person meeting. However, we do owe we do have to follow the rules and keep the meeting moving along. So
Scott, we'd have to choose that date in the public hearing. It can't happen in deliberations, but we can decide towards the end.
Very good. Thank you. Matt?
All right. Hopefully this is a little more loud and clear. Can I get a confirmation of that?
Sounds good here.
Terrific. Okay. So this is, as I said, a pre-application hearing for the review of a proposed 141-unit residential subdivision in between Mountain View Road and Raven Circle in the residential zoning district. I'm going to try to be fairly brief in my review of this staff report to make lots of room for public questions and comment. As the board has noted, and as is mentioned on the first page of the report, we have received a number of comment letters to be read into the record and that were included in the package that the DRB received for review prior to the hearing. And we are recommending that the board take testimony tonight, but also recess this hearing to a later date, earliest available date being April 28th, to take further comment. Emily, do you want to bring the staff report up on the shared screen?
Oh, is it not on the shared screen?
I'm still seeing the public participation.
Oops, I'm sorry, my bad.
Window.
There we go. Okay, can everyone see the staff report?
Looks good, thank you. So the subject parcel has a very lengthy project history that is recited on the second page of our staff report. And you can see that there was significant permitting in the past related to the development of this parcel, along with some adjacent parcels that have since become residential subdivisions as a large golf course. And then there was further subdivision development of some of the other parcels. And more pertinently and most recently related to the golf course property, as most people know it, a subdivision in 2009 that created 4 dwelling units on Mountain View Road. And recently in December 2018, a permit issued by the DRB finding that if the golf course was reduced in size, the banquet hall that's part of the golf facility could continue to be used as an accessory use to the golf course, which is the only way it can continue to exist under our zoning, because this is in the residential zoning district where commercial uses are limited. So project elements, the proposed use for this project is entirely residential, single and multifamily dwellings. Residential uses are allowed in the residential zoning district in Williston, and in the staff report, there are some quotes from Chapter 39 of the bylaw, which is our RZD chapter, explaining the purpose of the residential zoning district and as it relates to neighborhood design, density, and some of the other attributes of development in that part of town. There are proposed structures as a part of this project. They include the dwelling units themselves, as well as a community building with swimming pool, playground, and garden area. And structures in the RZD are limited to 36 feet in height, among other rules related to setbacks and things like that. Residential density, the applicant is proposing 141 total dwelling unit equivalents in the form of 141 units with 2 or more bedrooms and no studio or 1 bedroom units. Williston defines a studio or bedroom unit as 1/2 of a dwelling unit equivalent. We do not have any of those proposed in this project at this time. In terms of calculating potential residential density, the chapter in our bylaw, chapter 19, that covers that says that you take out lands that are wetlands or wetland protection buffers and certain steep slopes out of your base acreage before calculating your allowable density. And on page 4 of the staff report, you can see a table that explains the initial calculation of potential unit build out on the project based on that chapter. I want to note 2 important things about this table. One is that we've drawn this table in with a very small amount of acreage of wetland and watershed protection buffer. This is primarily based on a estimate of the watershed protection buffer to the unnamed stream at the south end of the project. But note that no wetland delineation has been done on the project yet, or slope analysis, and that either of those could take some more acreage out of this calculation and could result in a lower maximum potential unit count. With what we have today, though, we see a 56-acre parcel that generates a potential 146 dwelling units. The second thing I wanted to note about this table is what this reflects is a affordable housing incentive in the bylaw. This allows a project where a minimum of 30% of the units will be affordable perpetually at 100% or less than the median income of the area. The density is allowed to be increased from 3 dwelling units per acre to 5 dwelling units per acre. The applicant is proposing to access that incentive to achieve the build out of 141 units. So that's the statement there. The other things related to the subdivision design, including minimum lot size and frontage, would have to be discussed in the discretionary permit. Any parcels created as a part of this project would have to meet minimum street frontage requirements. Traffic at this stage of review, which is pre-application, the bylaw says this is the time for the DRB to request a traffic impact study, and the staff is recommending and has drafted a recommendation that the DRB request that. In terms of vehicular access, as I mentioned, there are 2 connections proposed to this development, one at Raven Circle and one at Mountain View Road. The new roads within the project would all be interconnected, and there are no dead ends or cul-de-sacs specified. At present, the site plan shows a relatively wide 64-foot right-of-way for those streets. And you see in the staff report, we've put in some of the language from the town's public works specifications, basically identifying that they're a bit of a guideline and recommending that on low-speed residential streets, the applicant work with the Public Works Department to develop streets that don't create excessive impervious surface or encourage vehicle speeds greatly in excess of the kinds of speeds people drive when the streets are too wide. Moving on, one of the issues that's likely to be significant in this project is reviewing the right-of-way and the watershed protection buffer as it pertains to the connection to Raven Circle. So in that right-of-way, which was conveyed to the town as a condition of approval of the development of the Coyote Run subdivision, adjacent to that right-of-way, there's an unnamed stream, and that stream generates a 50-foot wide buffer from its mean high water mark, and no impervious surface is allowed within this buffer except for crossings. We had a version of this plan with an offset T intersection of the new road to Raven Circle. Based on Public Works comments, the desired revision is a 2-way stop with 90-degree angles. So 2-way stop, 4-way intersection with the street aligning with Raven Circle as it comes around the loop. In order to do that, there is a portion of the pavement of the road about 13 feet wide, which would encroach upon the stream buffer for about 20 feet in linear distance. Although our current bylaw does not allow stream buffer impacts like that, it's going over a right-of-way that was established 17 years ago. And that right-of-way gives certain rights to the town and others to utilize it for a street connection. The staff did ask town council to weigh in on this matter and said, you know, we had this right-of-way. It was approved as part of the subdivision plat in 2003. Building a street within this right-of-way generates an impact to the watershed protection buffer that the bylaw would not allow to today. And essentially, we asked town council which of those conditions prevails when you're trying to determine whether the road can be built. The advice of town council was that the town's requirement and acceptance of that right-of-way in 2003 is what governs, and that a street may be built within that right-of-way, even if it has an encroachment into the 50-foot buffer to that stream. And that legal opinion is part of your packet for this application. We do have pedestrian and cyclist access proposed from Raven Circle to Mountain View Road along the new road. We do not have any desired primitive trails on the property, and the applicant has not proposed a trail easement as part of this project. There are some opportunities for connectivity to future paths and roads. This project is close to the Cirque Highway right-of-way and some common land in the adjacent Brennan Woods subdivision. The staff is recommending, and the site plan now shows, stub streets and future paths that would provide for additional connectivity between this neighborhood and the surrounding town. I'm going to move into landscaping and setbacks on the next page. And so this preliminary plan does show building envelopes with front, side, and rear setbacks. And then some footprint lots for single and multifamily units that where the unit would exist on common land but not come with a parcel of land. We look at setbacks for a development like this primarily as they relate to the setbacks between this subdivision and other adjacent lands. And the table that you're seeing in the staff report right here describes what those required setbacks are. And you can see that the way Williston's standards work, it's a flexible landscaping setback requirement where there are different types of landscape buffers at different widths that can be allowed based on the adjacent land and the impact coming from the developed land. We have made a couple of notes about the revised site plan and some of the open space it's showing, and just identifying for the applicant that there are some buffer widths and vegetation and landscaping plan that would need to be provided at the discretionary permit stage to show compliance with the bylaw. Also note that where we have dwellings in relatively close proximity to either on or off property trees or treed areas, that planning for some sort of a fall zone for those trees makes sense. We've had some experience in recent developments that were built very close to their rear lines where trees that were off property for the development ended up being identified as threatening the dwelling units if they came down. In fact, those trees were on town property, and it creates a potential neighbor conflict that we'd like to see avoided in a project coming forward now. In terms of water and wastewater, this project is located in the municipal sewer service area, and the applicant does propose connections to municipal water and sewer. The application for discretionary permit will have to include a capacity to serve letter. This would be a letter coming from the Public Works Director stating that upon his review of the project, he feels that the town has the capacity to serve the project with water and sewer. I'll also just note really quickly that the DRB review FAQ that is on the website and was provided to the DRB in their packet goes over a little bit more of the nuts and bolts of how the town handles things like traffic and water and sewer. So there's more there, and it pertains to any development, not just this one. In regards to open space, there is required open space in the project for the board's sort of recall, as opposed to when you're reviewing a project in the agricultural rural district. There's not a specific number or amount of open space that must be provided. However, there are some mapped resource areas in the town plan that open space should include. In this case, the entire subject parcel is currently developed with a golf course And there are a number of areas that are part of the town plan that are not identified or not applicable on this parcel due to the previous development. However, at the discretionary permit level and after wetland delineations are performed, land within watershed protection buffers shall be located on the open space per requirement 39.8.2.1 in the bylaw. And for anybody who is wondering what's open space is land that you can't ever build anything on. You can have some parkland on it. You can have trails and roads and utilities cross through it. You can garden on it. You can farm it. It can be forested, but it cannot be built on or developed in a more formal way. There are some open space and there are some viewshed resources mapped on this land. And essentially the bylaw directs people who are thinking of developing on land that has viewsheds to work with the Conservation Commission and ultimately the DRB to maximize protection of those identified views. And that recommendation for the applicant to do so is drafted in your pre-application recommendations. As I've mentioned a couple times in regards to wetlands and waterways, we do have a mapped unnamed stream on the subject parcel that's north of Raven Circle and east of the proposed access road. The plan you have in front of you today has no mapped Class 2 wetlands. There are some man-made ponds on the subject parcel. We would defer to the opinion of a professional wetland scientist who would need to be engaged further down in the review process as to whether any of those qualify as any sort of regulatory wetland. Williston's definition of a wetland defers to the state definition of a wetland. Moving on procedurally to growth management. Again, we're at the pre-application stage. This is a preliminary review of the project. It's an opportunity for the board to interrogate the project and provide recommendations to the applicant. The main things that the board actually decides at pre-application is whether to require a traffic study, and whether to authorize the project to move on to the growth management stage of review, which is the competitive process by which residential subdivisions are granted the ability to move on to discretionary permit, which, as Scott mentioned, is the really engineering heavy stage of review where all of the nuts and bolts and dimensions and specifications of the project are reviewed for compliance with the bylaw. If this project was authorized to go forward to growth management, it would happen in March of 2021. There's a minimum score of 30 points out of a total 100 that would be required for the project to move forward under growth management at all. The project is outside of the growth center, but within the sewer service area. So there's a particular set of criteria that the project would be reviewed against related to that geographic part of town. And to build out the entire project, 141 dwelling unit equivalents would need to be requested by the applicant. There's no inherent right to build on this parcel because that right was utilized when the fourplex was built in 2009. I'm going to stop there for a moment and just note that 141 units in growth management, because of the way growth management is set up, a project of this size would likely have to go through growth management a couple of different times in a couple of different years to obtain allocation for multiple phases of the project. It's mathematically not possible to grant 141 units all at once, and it's generally not seen by the town's bylaws or plan as desirable to do that. So this would be a multi-phase project as it pertains to growth management. In terms of public comment, 9 public comments letters were received by the time that we mailed the package out to the DRB. That was on April 9th. So we had letters from Thomas and Pamela Nash, David Westman, Chris Chase, Chelsea Levy, Jeff and Amanda Bolaba, B. Ricca, Michael G. Ricca, Scott Whittier, Mark and Nicole Ackerley. Those letters were included in the packet. And as we discussed a little earlier tonight, some of those letters did request that the board continue the hearing due to the circumstances we're in that allow only for remote meetings at this time. The board and anybody else listening in should be aware the staff did prepare a memo to the board, copied to town council about the need and justifiability of doing remote meetings during this time, both based on some recent legislation that passed allowing for meetings without a physical presence, but also standing procedures in the town bylaws and state law requiring that projects receive timely review. Those requirements have not been relaxed by any of the legislation that has come down. The requirement to hold a meeting with a physical place has, and there's a memo on our website and in the DRB packet to that effect. We did put this, yes.
We did get 2 letters from Tim Sheenan. They were sent to the DRB via email yesterday, and then I did receive 1 letter this afternoon from Terry Marin, and I uploaded that to the website before the hearing, but the board has not seen that one yet.
Okay, thank you. All of those comments, whether they were received in time for the board packet or not, will be made part of the record of the review of this project. We did hold an interdepartmental meeting with police, fire, and public works regarding this project in November and December of 2019. We did not receive a formal comment memo from the police. However, in the meeting, the police chief did agree with the DPW director about wanting the intersection to be squared up as a 4-way, and also emailed the staff to that effect. The fire chief commented that the structures that are going to be less than 30 feet apart would need to use cementitious or other non-flammable siding materials to prevent the transmission of fire from one structure to the other. However, the applicant has also discussed sprinkler systems within those buildings, which would also mitigate those fire transmission concerns. And the fire department strongly supports the sprinklering of new dwelling units. We did also receive a Department of Public Works memo regarding the project and identifying some of their requirements on November 7th of 2019, and a formal memo from the fire department dated January 28th, 2020. Those memos and addressing the concerns that are in those memos has been drafted as a recommendation the DRB will be making to the applicant. This project was reviewed by the Conservation Commission in its November version, and then again, just this month, the Conservation Commission reviewed the revised submission. The Conservation Commission's comments are included as recommendations for the DRB to adopt as well. And in response to the recommendation the Conservation Commission is making regarding viewshed impact, the staff has added a recommendation requesting renderings of the development from nearby viewpoints. So the DRB is probably familiar. Sometimes when you want to know what something will look like from a certain point of view, you request a rendering that actually puts 3-dimensional buildings on the site and shows what that view will like. So the staff has prepared a recommended action and a set of written recommendations that would authorize the applicant to proceed to the growth management stage of review in March of 2021. There may be a need within this and everything I've discussed for the DRB to add an additional recommendation about the viewshed impacts, depending on what the board would like to see as part of the discretionary permit review. And I'm going to stop there.
Thank you, Matt. Okay, so we're going to switch this around a little bit. We are going to, rather than opening it up to the board, we're going to go right to the members of the public who would like to talk and ask questions of the board and consequently about the project. Emily, if you can, first on your list, Scott Whittier.
Thank you, Scott. Thank you, Emily. I got one question for Matt, and I think it's the concern for a lot of people is the 50-foot buffer and the right-of-way. I understand it's a vested right, and that's the reason why it's going to pass. But my concern on that is a lot of our neighborhoods in Williston had to go and create excessive or extra water retention. And this is well after development, some 20, 30 years after developments were already established or whatever. So why in a pre-development phase that we cannot go back and look at that right-of-way issue?
Matt?
Sure. So the first part of the answer, why can't you go back, has to do with the approval that was made that vests everybody, essentially all parties, in the right-of-way as it was laid down. There's some law in Vermont related especially to when a subdivision is platted and a road is laid out, that generates a right to use that road that goes forward regardless of any other regulatory standard or any error that's made in its approval. And I'll just say that the town specifically lost on this issue in state environmental court about a year and a half ago, trying to have an unbuilt road that was platted 25 years ago built to a modern standard. And the judge found against the town that the town did not have the right to do that. The second part of your question is about stormwater, and I think probably a little bit of a broader one, which is what happens when there's a new project proposed that is going to add impervious surface to the town and generate additional runoff. And the answer is that new development will have to be built to the state's stormwater treatment standards. And those are the standards that existing developments in Williston over the last 5 years went through construction projects to bring them up to. So a new project has to be built to that standard from the beginning. And I'll leave it to the board to interrogate the applicant or fill in just what that treatment standard means. But it's the level of treatment of the certain size storm that many prior developments in Williston were not built to and had to be changed so that they would meet that standard. A new project would have to meet that standard from day one.
Okay, Matt, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, so just two follow-ups on that. If current developments needed to be retroactive for the state for a watersheds issue, again, that's going retroactive. So two things, I don't understand why that can't be for the road. But second of all, maybe you can answer this question. We're talking about a 50-foot buffer for a current roadway. What happens if we made this road a one-way access for emergency vehicles? Say, you'd have to talk to Ken, you'd have to talk to fire and police, but I would assume access would be preferable through Route 2 and then up through the neighborhood to get to this new development versus trying to go all the way around through Mountain View. So I don't know what the size dimension is for a one-way, but is that even conceivable to make it so it's not encroachment on that 50 feet?
I would have to defer to Public Works and their interpretation of their specifications as to whether a one-way street could be permitted and whether that would result in a width that might take the street out of the buffer. I don't think in the time I've been in Williston, which is 12 years, the town has approved a one-way street that it would then be in the position of taking over. And I should note that this connection from Raven Circle up through to Mountain View Road, there's a continuous piece of street from Raven to Mountain View that the town would be planning on taking over once it was completed. So it's the Public Works specifications, which apply to all roads in town, and also then the Public Works director signing off and saying whatever is built there is something to our standard that we would be willing to maintain and take care of forever and ever. I have seen neighborhoods built with one-way street accesses as a way of trying to limit cut-through traffic. I have not seen it done in Williston. I could certainly follow up with the Public Works Director to try to get a better answer during this hearing process.
I appreciate that, Matt, and an excellent summary of the project. Greatly appreciate you taking your time.
Sure.
Scott, what additional questions do you have or comments?
I think that's it, Scott. I greatly appreciate the opportunity to ask those questions. I think I'm all set. Thank you very much.
Okay. All right. Thank you. We're going to move to Tim Sheehan. Tim, are you on?
Can you hear me?
Try that. Tim, try that again.
Can you hear me now?
I can. Yeah, we can hear you. We can hear you now.
Okay, great. Yeah, just echoing what Chris just said there. I guess I would like a little more information on, that possibly being a one-way, and I don't know what the board's stance on that is, but why couldn't that be, a contingent approval for them as to, maybe they need to do that as far as an association and continue to take care of that road if the Department of Public Works won't take over something like that.
Well, so let me just add one point that Matt alluded to this. I'm going to just flesh it out a little bit. Within the town of Williston's bylaw, there is a section on connectivity. The town does look for the ability to move within neighborhoods from one neighborhood to another from the major arteries. So that is spelled out in the bylaw. As Matt said, the board is the staff and the board are happy to query DPW and get their opinion on it. I don't believe that is something we would be willing to require the applicant to do prior to that.
Okay, so when you say, via artery, a major artery to connect to neighborhoods, it would seem to me that, when Coyote Lane was first finished, it was finished to a T intersection, kind of dead ends. And the latest proposal on this project shows a dead end basically going straight towards one of those dead ends at Coyote Lane, which would be actually the main artery in this neighborhood. And that also has the a dead end of the bike path that goes right up Coyote Lane as well. That would seem to make way more sense to connect directly into that artery versus going into a watershed and disrupting all that.
Understood. So when I say artery, what I was referring to was Mountain View Drive and Route 2. Those are the main arteries. To answer your question, and Matt, feel free to chime in. What you were looking at on the site plan that the applicant has presented to the town and to you is a possibility of a future development. Now, they're not telling us that they're going to do that, but that's what it looks like. So they're building out that T intersection that would head toward Coyote Lane with the idea. I'm assuming they haven't said so, but why would it be built otherwise? That at some point in the future, that may very well be a connection, but that is not part of the proposal today. They have a parcel of land that they would like to develop. It does not extend to Coyote Lane. That's still part of the golf course. And the right of way that they are proposing comes in from Raven Circle.
And I understand that, but obviously they would, if they wanted to alter this proposal, and clearly, where Raven Circle is, where they're proposing it, the curb isn't cut out there, and it wasn't, especially when I bought my house on Raven Circle, it was clear that wasn't, set up for future development, where the end of Coyote Lane clearly is. And so why wouldn't the board...
Well, Tim, I would disagree with you. I would disagree with you simply because a curb has not been cut out does not mean that it was not, that right of way didn't exist when you bought your house.
I understand that part, but I'm saying is, I drove the neighborhood prior to purchasing, and if we want to do, less roads, and we're talking about keeping as much green space and, less impact on watershed and environment. And it's clear that connection is going to be there at some point. Why wouldn't that just be a contingency on this new proposal and just, take that whole watershed, roadway, buffer zone right out of the mix?
Sure, that's a good point. Again, I'm gonna pull Matt in here, but I think the correct answer is the parcel of land that we are dealing with, that the board is discussing and the town is looking at, is what you see in front of you. It is not the other parcel. So we don't have the right to go to we don't have the right to go to anyone and say, oh, by the way, you have to pull in that other parcel. Matt, feel free to chime in on that.
Sure. I think you're correct, Scott, that you can't impose a requirement that somebody negotiate access with an adjacent owner who's not party to the application. You can require that the project meet the bylaw, and that's where this really kind of comes down. In the case of this particular street connection, meeting the bylaw to the letter is not possible. And in fact, it wasn't possible when this road right-of-way was laid out by the applicants who developed Raven Circle and Coyote Run in 2003, laid it out. There was a setback at that time as well, and it was essentially the right-of-way was placed a little too close to the stream buffer in error and accepted by everyone, unappealed, unchallenged at that time. And once something like that happens and that final plat is signed and recorded, everybody's bound to it. But your point is correct that you can't just compel somebody to go negotiate with an off-property owner to do something different if they are able to meet your bylaw and your development standards on their own parcel. The project either works under the bylaw or it does not. And then there are little things that modify that statement, like what happened in the past, what was accepted, what's the legal precedent, et cetera. And that's why we have to do these DRB hearings, is to figure those things out.
Well, I can tell you that, obviously I live on that corner, and every single, car that takes that corner, it's going to shine their headlights directly into my bedroom and living room day in and day out, through the night. And clearly it's going to erode the values of not just, my house, but other houses in that neighborhood. And along with, the traffic and dumping, I understand dumping a bike path right into nothing really there, but it certainly doesn't seem like they're really taking into account, the current residents that are there.
Tim, understood. The board is the board does hear that.
Another comment, I guess.
Yep.
I read, and I don't remember where I read it, that this proposed development, is similar to some of the other things, and I think they mentioned Northridge somewhere in the reading that I was reading about. But in the reading, I see that Northridge, it has 39 or 40 units over about 40 acres, and I think there's only 3 of those that were multi-unit, which is about 10%. I think of the units were multi-unit. This development, I did the calculation, 83% of the units are multi-unit dwellings. And that is just not even close to being, the same as the adjacent neighborhoods that it's next to. And I can't help but think that, we're trying to keep continuity and things relatively the same. And that's not, it's just not even close. as far, the density is like 3 times more dense than just that the newest development that's being built right now at Northridge. And I don't understand why the proposal as it stands would accept something like that that's so much more dense in relation to all the surrounding neighborhoods that it's adjacent to.
I think the answer, given that we are at pre-app and this proposal is, this is part of the discussion. While it may be different from the surrounding areas, it is residential and it does comply with the bylaw. So they are perfectly allowed to present this idea of density. The bylaw gives them that right.
And I understand that, but and is it not the board's right to review that and try to make these neighborhoods, the continuity of them, and keep them intact versus plotting something that's very different from the adjacent neighborhoods? And
sure, yes, and I think the board will take that into consideration. I would mention that the board does not try to homogenize all developments, and hopefully I'm saying that right. We don't want the board does not want every proposed neighborhood to look like every other existing neighborhood. Diversity of housing is another part of our bylaw that the town looks for.
And I can.
Scott,
I'm sorry.
If I can add, Tim, some of the things that you talked about relate to the growth management scoring. So when a project goes to growth management, there's a more detailed set of criteria. This district is not a design review district, but there are some other criteria that are incentivized in the bylaw that relate a little bit more of how one neighborhood leads into the next neighborhood. And there's not a strict standard that the unit type be exactly the same, but that there is compatibility. And so those concerns will come into play at the growth management hearing phase.
Okay, thank you, Emily and Scott. I guess want to reiterate that I understand that, and I'm not opposed to development at all. But I think prior to the actual Northridge development, I'm not sure there was any multi-units in this development, and then to go from we can add a few here to almost all of it in a new proposed development. It's certainly there is no continuity there.
I understand your point.
Okay. That being said, I guess that's all that I have. I did submit a letter. I think Emily said that. I actually submitted it back in January. That didn't get included, but hopefully get a chance to read that letter as well.
Yeah, my apologies on that, Tim. I sent it to them yesterday evening.
Okay, thank you.
Tim, thanks a bunch.
Thank you.
Next up is Dave Westman.
All right, Dave, I am finding you in the list. Allowed to talk.
Okay, I've unmuted myself. Thanks for having me.
Welcome.
I just wanted to first compliment Bonnie and Matt and the planning team for the review of the application, and I really appreciated reading through that both the first time and the second time. I thought it was a sort of fair representation, and I appreciated all of the considerations, and I certainly learned a lot reading through all of the many aspects of that review. My comments submitted on December 3rd are largely in the form of questions. I understand that at this phase in the process, the project needs to go through a number of considerations before a final or I guess a pre-application is sort of submitted, and I understand that the pre-application will contain a lot more information than what we've seen.
Dave, it's the discretionary permit that contains all the fleshed out project, all of the engineering, all of the.
I see.
So we're in pre-app right now.
We're in pre-app now,
and really it's a general discussion about the project, with to see if it complies, to see if it could comply. That's probably a better way of putting
it. Right.
Okay.
So my question actually is a little bit about this Netherland that we seem to be in terms of wanting more very specific details about the project, with recommendations around the growth, recommendations around where multi-use pathways should be, how that relates to the growth management process, and the review by that committee. So that would be my first question, and I think this might be directed at Matt, because Matt, in your sort of preamble to the project, you mentioned that this would likely come in multiple phases at growth management. Could you maybe speak a little bit to that, or if you have insight from the developer about what areas are going to be thought of as sort of first run priorities, just so that we can get a sense of the scaling or the I guess the order of operations for how this development would lay out?
Let's let the applicant answer that question.
Yep.
Sure, I can answer that. Paul O'Leary here. So obviously under the Williston regulations, we're only allowed 40 units off of a single access. So I'm not sure what the current count is when you look at Coyote Lane and Raven Circle. I don't think it's 40, but I don't know exactly what that count is. So we could only actually do a relatively small number of units initially off of Raven Circle before we would have to build the road all the way through to Mountain View Road. So we expect that the development will likely start from the Mountain View Road end and will build in that direction. So all our construction traffic will come from Mountain View, exit to Mountain View, and we'll start with that portion and proceed in a southerly direction. And obviously we understand through growth management that we won't be allocated all the units at one point in time, that it will be a phased project.
Do you have any idea how long that phase would be? Would that be according to the market of how quickly you can sell the units, or according to a formula of how quickly you can develop the area?
Paul, let's let Matt answer that question.
Sure.
Sure. I mean, I can't predict the ultimate pace of the development. What I can identify for the group is that typically the growth management has resulted in allocation of around 20 or 25 units at a time to a project. And those units have a significant window of time during which they can be built, and so the actual pace of development on the ground usually reflects a pause at the beginning, an accumulation of units that are available to build, and then some moving forward. But I would anticipate that there would be, I don't know, this might be the kind of project that builds over a period of 6 to 10 years, just based on the pace of other developments I've observed in Williston. And some of it does depend on the market. Some of it depends on the ability of the town to provide growth management allocation. I will note that because there would be multiple growth management allocation applications for a project of this size, each time the project came in to receive allocation or to ask for allocation, it would be competing with any other projects in this part of town that came in that year as well. And I should remind everybody that growth management's a competitive process that incentivizes energy efficiency, affordable housing, open space, paths and trails, and a number of other attributes. There's a number of things we see on the pre-application of this project that appear to be designed to attempt a fairly high score within growth management, it's likely that it would remain competitive. But in growth management, there are no absolute guarantees that an applicant will get what they ask for each time they come in and ask for allocation. Mathematically speaking, looking at the way growth management is set up in the bylaw right now, I think the project would likely need to be in at least thirds to get through growth management. A third of a project at a time at minimum. So growth management in March of 2021, and then a return to growth management in subsequent years at least twice.
Thank you. I just want to think about that very candid assessment of the length of the project as a 6 to 10 year project, as that should be considered as part of this process, which is the sort of ongoing construction and disruption to the neighborhood and how that would impact the surrounding area, including the vehicle study. Given the length of time, I think construction traffic should be an absolute consideration, especially on a road like Mountain View, which is already a very busy road, and what the effect of construction traffic over the next 6 to 10 years would look like. I would also want to consider other effects like noise pollution and the immediate areas of our existing neighborhoods like Brennan Woods to the west, to Ravens Circle that was mentioned by the previous caller. That seems like that should be addressed in this as well. I think if we only looked at how the project should look at the end of 10 years, we're missing a huge chunk of what all of us as Williston residents today would have to be living with. So I'm just that's commentary on top of my existing questions, because I did not contemplate that it would be such a long process. I do have a couple other questions. I mean, my comments stand. I'll respect the chair's request to not go through each one, but I will highlight a couple others, very specific questions. Obviously, we're talking about the circumferential highway as being an existing right-of-way, but my comments point out, and I'm surprised that no one's addressed it directly, that is now the home to a very high-pressure gas pipeline that goes through that right-of-way. And so I am concerned with extensive construction in and around a high-pressure gas main. And I didn't see that addressed in any of the application permits. And I'm wondering if we can either hear from the developer or hear from the town on how the fire department requires construction activities in and around that pipeline.
Paul O'Leary.
I don't really have much to comment on that. The pipeline is within the Cirque Highway right away. Our current plan shows a 35-foot buffer. Staff has recommended a 50-foot buffer from the right-of-way, which we will likely accept. So I don't see, that at least will be 50 feet from the Cirque Highway right-of-way. So that puts us at least 50 feet from that high-pressure gas line.
Okay, so what's the size of the average truck that you would be using to do the excavation in and around those initial developments that you said would be moving south from Mountain View Road first?
Do you want me to answer that, Scott? I mean, it's regular construction vehicles. Regular construction vehicles like you see on every other job site.
And what's the size of those trucks?
Well, a typical dump truck is about 45 feet in length.
Thank you. So you will be driving over the right-of-way if you're directly over the excavation zone. That's my concern. A 50-foot.
No, we won't. No, that's incorrect, because we're talking about establishing a 50-foot open space buffer from the Cirque Highway, which means that we will be putting a construction fence up all along that buffer, where on that plan it says open space. And the idea of the fence is to make sure that no construction traffic or no construction personnel goes into that 50-foot open space section. So there will be no construction vehicles within 50 feet of the Cirque Highway right-of-way.
Okay, so we would expect in the project application that there would be a fencing.
Hey, Dave Westman.
Yeah.
So your point is taken. This is one of those topics that we can address at discretionary permit with a statement. Should it get that far, that says simply no construction vehicle would enter the right of way of the state of Vermont. And paying particular attention to the high pressure gas main in that area.
Thanks. I mean, that's certainly reflective of what my concern is. I mean, that my house is on the other side of that right of way, and so any damage to that pipeline or any cause for concern due to a poor construction practice is very much felt by my entire neighborhood, including myself. So I mean, that's obviously an important issue for me.
Understood.
And I'd like to see it addressed in the next phase.
Understood.
I'll raise my next question then was that the pre-application requirement is to identify the source and location of all utility connections, and I did not see
that's not correct. That comes at discretionary permit. Okay,
I must have misread that then somewhere.
Yeah, so that will be spelled out when the engineering for the site is completed and submitted to the town. You would obviously get a chance to review that. All of the utility connections would be laid out and identified and located at that time.
Okay. Can the developer just briefly state if the utilities will be coming off of the Mountain View side or the Coyote side? It sounds like it'll be the Mountain View side.
I imagine the water line will be looped. It will connect both to Raven Circle and to Mountain View. Sanitary sewer will flow towards Raven Circle.
And gas and electric?
The gas and electric will loop throughout the project.
Coming off of Mountain View.
And probably connecting to Raven Circle.
And connecting to Raven Circle, okay.
Really up to the power company on how the loop ends up being.
Yep.
Okay. And then the other question that I wanted to identify is that Mountain View Road is identified as a circumferential highway transportation alternative zone. And it's also the subject of the town mobility committee identifying Mountain View Road as a priority area for multi-use bike paths or pedestrian paths. And I noticed that we have a pathway in this proposal going to Mountain View Road, but it just kind of dead ends there. Is there any opportunity or planning for this project to take advantage of what is clearly a transportation alternative need for the town of Williston? In other words, can this project also develop part of that Mountain View Road multi-use path or alternative transportation?
We're not proposing that.
No, I know you're not proposing it. I'm asking. I'm asking if it could be considered.
So, Dave, that's something the board can consider.
Okay. I would recommend that the board consider that. It's an important part of what the town needs, and it will be identified in the mobility committee once the because that committee is actually not continued activities through this process,
Okay.
and so we are planning to recommend that, and I'm one of the participants in that committee.
Okay. Other comments?
No, I think that'll be all. But what I would generally ask the board to consider is all of these questions that I proposed as a butter, landowner, however you want to sort of put that. And I would definitely like to see just as the town had very good recommendations, I would like to see the board adopt some of these questions as necessary for answering in the next phase of the process, the discretionary permit.
Very good.
Thank you.
Before we move on to Pete, if you're an attendee and you would like to be listed to speak, please press the raise hand button on your toolbar. and I can add your name. Yeah, Pete, I have you next. I know Terry requested to go towards the end. But there are several folks that if your name's not on this list, if you'd like to speak, press the raise hand feature or send me a message in the chat and I'll add you. Pete, I'm going to go ahead and allow you to talk.
Let me chime in 1 second before Pete comes on, and that is that staff has asked that we limit testimony to 9 o'clock. I'm going to extend that. It's already 8:28, 8:30. I'm going to extend that to 9:30. This, as stated previously, this will be continued. We will discuss that in the open hearing on the future date. But please keep your comments as brief as possible. Obviously, we are here to take all of the testimony. Everybody will get a chance. If it's not today, it will be at the next hearing. Thank you. Mr. Watson.
Can you hear me though, Scott?
How did you sneak in ahead of all these other people?
Beats me. Bonnie and Emily obviously can pull strings.
You're up.
So I did ask a few questions online, and I'm not sure if they're visible to everyone, so I'll just repeat them as I wrote them. I said, so is there a reason, or is there a thought process behind? Is there a way to limit the access via only Mountain View? And if not, why not?
So that was discussed. Earlier in both with Mr. Whittier and Mr. O'Leary. Paul, you want to touch on that very briefly?
Well, first of all, a parcel obviously has access to Mountain View, and we have a right-of-way that gives us access to Raven Circle. We currently don't have any rights to access Coyote Run or any of the Martell property. We'd have to negotiate with the Martells to be able to do that. So as it stands, we have two means of access. The Williston regulations require that anytime you have more than 40 units, you need to have two means of ingress and egress. So if we're going to do more than 40 units on this parcel, we need to connect to both Mountain View and to Raven Circle.
Okay. All right.
And I should add, there was a comment earlier about Northridge being a lot less dense. Northridge originally had a lot more units than what they ended up getting permitted, but Northridge is limited to a single access because they couldn't negotiate with Mr. Martell for a second access, and as such, they were limited to a total of 40 units. So, Northridge had the same problem that we had with just single access.
Okay, my next question, and thank you for that. I appreciate that, Paul. And I did hear some discussion before about unlike structures, and I think this is an ongoing problem that's being felt by neighbors that don't feel there's being added value to the neighborhoods when you're putting in multi-family units in single-family developments. So where you have half-acre or larger lots, we're now imposing higher densities. And it happened on the Northridge project, and now I see it happening on this project. Is there a way that the bylaws can be written to have like conformities of existing neighborhoods, because current homeowners feel the stress of their properties being devalued?
So Pete, I'm going to chime in on this one. That question is being posed in at the wrong place. If that's a question that you would like to have answered, you should start with the Planning Commission and make your case in front of them. If they agree with you, they would submit a revised bylaw requirement to the Select Board. Select Board would vote on it, pass it, and then it would get into our bylaw.
Got it. Because you're just trying to implement the existing bylaws.
That is correct.
Got it. So just and again, I only saw the picture of the project quickly, so I really can't get the full scope of it. But the future right-of-way where the currently proposed 3 golf holes are, is there something else? Because it sounds like that future right-of-way could be turned down or not proposed as part of this project to therefore limit any future building, similar to what was done on the Raven Circle project, where that was pre-approved. So you actually can prevent that same situation from happening again by controlling that, or limiting or eliminating that right of way as part of this project.
Are you Paul, Pete, are you talking about the unconnected access, the unconnected T?
Yeah, it looks like the cursor was just flowing over it.
Yeah.
Right in that spot there next to the golf course, right, the 3 holes that they're proposing. If you have a similar situation like what happened now, if you look down farther at Raven Circle, so part of the Raven Circle project was an approval of that curb cut, that right of way, but can you limit it as a planning board? You say, no, as part of this project, we are not going to propose or allow for a right of way into that golf course area.
That is not something that the board has the right to do.
Who does? Because in other words, I'm trying to limit the amount of future expansions.
Yeah, I understand that. That would be a taking of somebody's rights, and that's not something we have the ability to do.
So how was the Raven Circle curb cut then approved? Like, who owned that?
That I do not know.
Because that would have gone through the planning process, right?
It would have gone through the development review board. It would have gone through the planning process. That's correct.
But the DRB approved the Raven Circle project.
You lost me.
Right, and I guess I'm not describing this as, in other words, we're talking about a right of way that was given. Who actually approves that? Because here we're at another project being approved. So it's like, whoa, let's limit or control or manage how these right of ways are designated and given.
Right. So at this point, that right of way exists, Pete. We can't take that away. It exists. It's owned by at this point by Mr. Senesac. The future right of ways on other projects, after something like this, may very well be looked at very carefully. But I would also add that if you are looking to reduce growth, reduce density, and reduce projects, I would tell you to go back to my description of changing the bylaw, which starts with the planning commission.
Right. So I guess on this project approval, though, who would be approving the right of way? Is it the planning board or is it the DRB board?
So as of right now, the right of way exists. It's not being approved. It already exists.
Right, the Raven Circle one does, but
that's correct.
Not the one going into the 3-hole golf course.
That I don't have any information on.
See, that's what I'm trying to figure out. How is that limited?
Well, that is not part of this discussion tonight, Pete.
Okay.
I'm not trying to put you off.
I'm just trying to find out who do I go to talk to that says, look, we got to start limiting all these projects. So, somebody's going to have the approval of this right of way going into the, the existing or future planned 3-hole golf course. That's where I think.
And I think that at this point, that is controlled by the property owner. And that it is controlled by the unified bylaw of the town of Williston.
Okay. No, I appreciate it, everyone. I know this is a little awkward, but thank you.
Anything else?
No, not for now.
Thank you.
Thank you, guys.
Chelsea Levis.
Yep, she is. She said in chat that she had to leave the meeting. I'll check back for her before we close out.
Okay.
Up next, we have Jeff
Baliba.
Yep. And I'm going to add Mark Ackerley to the list.
Hi, everyone. just wanted to say thanks to the town of Williston and the board for enabling the Zoom video call. I have two main questions to discuss. First one is, does the town and the board feel like leaning in on a 2003 right-of-way that was deemed as too close to the stream buffer, does that fit our standards for today in 2020?
So Matt, I believe you covered that in your opening statement. Do you want to touch on that one more time?
Sure. So that right-of-way in its position too close to that stream buffer was approved by the Development Review Board in 2003 as part of the approval of the Raven Circle project. And that approval and the subsequent recording of a subdivision plat that included that right-of-way essentially casts that right-of-way in the future development of a street within it in stone. And that's the opinion of the town's legal counsel in particular in reviewing that right-of-way in the building of a street in it as of a couple of months ago when we asked.
So you're not saying you agree or disagree, you're just saying it's set in stone and it is what it is.
It's correct. It's there.
Yeah.
That's the plat for Raven Circle there.
Let me chime in, Jeff, and tell you that is the opinion of the town's attorney.
Okay.
Okay. So the upshot of that is, there may be other attorneys with other opinions.
Yeah. Okay. Second one is, it seems like this plan is excessive and greedy, with the approximate 83% of the buildings being multiplex in this area. So I'm just curious, once again, what the board and the town thinks on that.
So what the board thinks, I'm going to speak for the board. What the board thinks is that we haven't made a decision on it. However, the applicant is allowed a certain level of density. They are proposing a development. Keep in mind, it's a proposal. They're proposing a development that currently, based on what has been shown to the board, fits within the density levels as spelled out by the Williston Unified Bylaw. So excessive, greedy, maybe not, but within the rules. Consequently, they're allowed to do that. Doesn't mean they'll get it, but
yeah,
that they're allowed to do it.
Okay, great. Thanks for the time.
Thank you.
All right. Next on the list is Terry Marin.
Welcome, Terry.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Great. So my name is Terry Marin. I'm a resident of Williston, and I'm also a member of the group Citizens for Responsible Growth. And a lot of my concerns were of the what the Conservation Committee had touched on about the development being too close to the a lot about the storm runoff with all this impervious surface. That's going to be a lot of water that's going to be coming off of this development. Also, the amount of sewer that this project will be taking up for the allocation. I know that there's not an indefinite amount of sewer that's available looking down the road for future development. And just the traffic, which has been addressed a little bit, but Mountain View Road is extremely busy. I know at certain times of the day, and just to add this amount of traffic coming out of this development will really make it pretty bad at certain times of day. And the just open space, the problem with that, there's no requirement for any amount of open space. So what would be in this development could be just patchwork. So there really wouldn't be any continuity to this open space, which to me, the quality of life of the people that will be living in this development, I think that's pretty, the density is incredible. So I think that would, with houses that close, and just that the development itself really isn't, to my seeing, is that it's not in line with the town of Williston's vision for the future, with the responsible growth and trying to maintain rural character and conservation and things. So I think that it really, because of the density of this project, does take away, and it doesn't match the other residential developments around it. So hopefully the board will take this all into consideration going further. Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Mark Ackerley.
Hi, thank you.
Welcome, Mark.
Great. Are you hearing me okay?
We are.
All right. Thank you. I have, I've sent in a letter, and that articulates most of my primary concerns. Two of the items that I'd like to reinforce and for the board's consideration on recommendations. One is very strongly about the traffic study, really having a review of what the impacts of this dense of a development is going to have on the surrounding areas, particularly through the Southridge, Coyote Run neighborhoods are already going to be greatly impacted with Northridge development, as well as this additional traffic, with 250 to 300 vehicles likely to be within this area alone. That's a huge increase from current volumes, particularly at Williston Road in that intersection that already can be dangerous at times. Related to that, one of the things I don't see, and maybe the developer can speak to this a little bit, is there's no illustration as far as how those vehicles will be stored and maintained, whether there's parking areas. There doesn't seem to be a lot of area within the layout of the buildings, and no indication as far as whether these will be garage, whether there will be non-pervious surfaces that will have to be support that they're not in these illustrations as well. And related to that, if there's that much more additional non-pervious surface, what the environmental impacts and the runoff of those effects will be as well. We already have had discussions around the stream and the wet areas that currently reside in the borders between Coyote Run, Raven Circle, and the golf course. And with this additional runoff and manipulation of that, there's concerns about the downstream impacts of that water, and an environmental impact study, I think, would be crucial in understanding what the real impacts to the surrounding neighborhoods will be from this development.
Mark, so let's get the developer to talk about parking and the stormwater runoff. See if we can get them to address that.
Sure. So we expect that all the units will have either single or dual car garages. In terms of parking, we're at the pre-application phase, so we haven't shown driveways or garages on the plan. And we expect there'll be a certain amount of on-street parking that will also be available for residents. In terms of stormwater, we will obviously have more than 1 acre of impervious. We'll be required to get a permit from the state of Vermont. That permit will have to show that we are providing adequate pretreatment and that we are limiting our flows off our site to no more than the 10-year storm. So basically all the rules that are in effect for all the other developments are in effect for us.
Okay, thank you.
Mark, as part of this process, should it make it past pre-app, a traffic study certainly will be required.
Thank you.
Anything else?
No, the rest of my concerns were clearly articulated, so I don't feel any need to tie up everybody's time on that.
Thank you.
All right, Dave Westman raised his hand again.
Great. David?
Yeah, thank you. This question is actually for the board. I just wanted to point out that my earlier comment about the site map not having the approximate location of utilities, and I think that it was the board's response that was not a requirement of the pre-application process. I just want to point to the pre-application checklist that's posted online as needing to include the approximate location of existing streets and utilities that will serve the proposed development, and of known easements and right-of-ways. It seems like it's met the quality on the right-of-ways and the streets, but by my viewing of this, I don't see those approximate location of utilities.
Okay. Well, I may have gotten that wrong. Matt, you want to correct me on that?
Well, what David refers to, he's correct. That's exactly the language on the checklist. It says approximate location of existing streets and utilities that will serve the proposed development. I will say that in the DRB's practice, it has generally taken it as written that existing streets have the typical utilities in them unless they're informed otherwise, or we're in a place where there's a rural subdivision. So, that there would be water and sewer and power on Raven Circle, and the same likely either on Mountain View Road or at least power on Mountain View Road. I would just say that you're right that level of detail is not on this plan. However, the standard practice of the DRB has not been to look for a real big level of detail on utility locations as part of the review of a residential subdivision at pre-application.
Thanks, Matt. I totally understand and can respect that. However, given the density of this development and the expected, I'm thinking of the electric power load as well as gas load. I mean, it could very well be water, but it just seems like this has a very high density that could affect the load, and whether or not the existing facilities off of either Coyote or Mountain View are actually consistent or of a power rating or can meet that volumetric flow that would be required during expected peak load for any of the utilities in this area. I just don't know that the rest of the. Yeah.
Dave, let me chime in and say that we can ask given that this hearing is going to be continued, we can ask that the applicant show on the site plan the approximate locations of the utilities. To answer your question, that those answers would not be provided at pre-app. So that part I'm sure of. As part of the engineering, which doesn't occur until the discretionary permit phase, that is when those questions would be answered, not at the pre-app phase. They can certainly show the locations.
Understood. Thank you for that clarification.
Other questions?
No, that's all. Thank you.
So I went through everyone that is on the list. There are a couple folks that are attendees. If you would like to speak, please press the raise hand button or use the chat feature. Not hearing from anyone else.
Okay, while we're waiting, does the board how does the board feel about the continuance date for this hearing? Staff recommended the 28th. The participants would like to see it at a time when it could possibly be in a open in-person meeting. based on the state of Vermont's rules, it does not have to be that way. What do the members of the board think?
I'll chime in first. I think I'm compelled by one of the participants' statement that some of his due diligence is not accessible or available right now due to the COVID closures. So my inclination would be to extend the timeline for the next meeting until after until after at least May 15th, perhaps even later, so that some of that due diligence can be done as well as an in-person meeting.
Okay.
I would agree with that.
Dave Turner.
The engineering that that is on hold right now is really not applicable to this phase of the review process. That would come in the discretionary phase. So I don't see a compelling reason. I don't share that view that there's a compelling reason to push the continued hearing out into the future to accommodate that, because that's at the next phase. And I would also like to point out that that we don't know what rules are going to come down from Governor Scott in terms of size limitations in the future. And if we were to continue this meeting to some time after May 15, there's no way for us to know what limitations for public gatherings that are going to be in place when the work from home mandate is lifted. So is April 28th the right day? I don't know, but I don't think it should be extended greatly from beyond that date.
Thank you, Pete. Paul?
Yeah, I would say that pushing this out, who knows what the next COVID rules are, because it could be we might extend past May, depending on what Fauci has to say. Second item, some of the items that were of concern seem like they would fall under Act 250 rather than us anyhow. Because punching that sewer to connect to Coyote Way is going to basically have to deal with that creek, and dealing with that creek, that's going to be an Act 250 exercise, isn't it?
Agreed.
So, in a sense, a lot of that discussion is basically out of our purview at this point. That's going to be an Act 250 deal, not our deal.
That's
we
correct.
just have to make sure the Act 250 happens, right?
Well, we don't have to make sure it happens. The applicant will have to make sure it happens.
Yeah, but I'm trying to say is before it comes back for us to finally deal with the final actions, that 250 is going to have to be resolved, right?
Well, no, we will deal with that. We deal with it concurrently.
Okay.
Emily,
I would say there's no compelling reason that we have to have a face-to-face on this.
By law, that is correct. Emily, what's the first date of the next hearing after 5/15?
It would be May 26th, which is the day after Memorial Day. In case holidays and weekends mean anything at that point in time.
What is it? That's 5 weeks away. 5 weeks away. What does the board think about continuing us to 5/26 as opposed to April 28th?
I'm fine.
I'm fine with it. How is the developer? Are they in a rush to go further, faster, or will it matter to them?
No. You can't ask that question of the developer. Of course, they're in a rush.
Seeing how,
I mean, he can't really do anything for a while, anyways. But
that's correct.
Yeah,
we have no objections to May 26th.
Okay. All right. So everybody in agreement? We'll continue this to May 26th.
Yes.
Agree.
Okay. Great. All right. That's fine. So it's 9:00. Does the board As I mentioned earlier, staff had requested we limit this to 2 hours. I had said that we would continue, we would go to 9:30. It seems to me that we're at kind of a natural stopping point, given the fact that we are going to continue this to 5:26. How does the board feel about stopping this portion of the hearing and going into a deliberative session?
So moved.
Support that.
Fine
Sounds
with
good.
it.
Okay. All right. So the Development Review Board for the town of Williston at 8:58 is going to go into a deliberative session, ending this portion of the hearing. Once we're out of the deliberative session, we will be back online. In this at this setting. Okay.
All right.
Everybody, you have your other dial-in, other link to the deliberative session.
Yep. So public attendees, you can hang out here. The DRB members will return.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Hi, Paul.
Hello.
Okay, everybody's up. It's currently 10:09. The Town of Williston's Development Review Board is out of deliberations at that time. The pre-application hearing for DP 20-18 Catamount Golf subdivision will be continued to May 26th. Do I have a motion based on a roll call to approve the minutes of March 24, 2020?
I'll make a motion to approve the minutes as written.
I'll second.
Pete makes a motion. Who seconds it? Jill seconds it.
Sure.
Jill seconds it.
I'm going to abstain.
David abstains. Okay, so running through, Pete, you made the motion. Are you voting yay or nay?
Yay.
Yay. Paul?
Yay.
Jill?
Yay.
Dave abstains. I vote yay. Four yays. Ayes. One abstention. Motion passes. Anything else, guys? Who would like to make a motion to adjourn the meeting at 10:10?
I'll make a motion to adjourn it.
Dave Turner makes the motion. Second?
I'll second.
Pete seconds it. So moved. Thank you very much, everybody. Have a good evening.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Bye, guys.
Bye.
Bye-bye.